we went on, I think I remember, sorry, Monday 11th of June, we went in to have the procedure. And as soon as I came up, I remember there was this big room, and the room was full of doctors, and they had all different type of colours of shirts on, so you could tell they were all different departments. And I remember coming out and goes, "Oh, you're not supposed to see this," because not just because they didn't want to daunt us before we saw it, but we stayed overnight. The midwives and everyone was so lovely. I think they were excited as well that it was the UK's first fetal surgery, and they were doing the testing and everything, making sure it was okay. So I fell asleep there, I think, because in the morning I would have seen him. My husband stayed with me that night. And no, he went back to Gosh, and he came early in the morning because they were going to take me at 8. And then in the morning they came, they did the obs. The anaesthetist came, told me this is what I was going to do, because they would have had to put me to sleep and the baby to sleep. So they asked you general questions that have you been put under the anaesthetic before, which I had the previous pregnancy, so I was okay. And so they started that, they did the obs, I got changed, and I remember I gave my husband a hug. And as I was coming in, I was just so nervous, and they were all smiling at me, and I walked into the operation theatre with all this staff, but there was like half of what we saw last time. And my husband said that once he had said bye to me and given him a hug and walked into the operation theatre, as he came out, there was the rest of them outside, like there was quite a few of them. And then I remember I was worried. I wasn't worried about myself. I was worried about the baby, and if it would be successful, if it was okay. So those are the things that I worried at that time. And I had obviously said goodbyes to my family and members, because when I ended up telling them, I'll speak to that about later, but it's just that emotion, and having a support network is really, really important. So I did that. Felt really scared, and I was worried for the baby. I left my kids at home, and my kids, like, because I had 2 of the kids, and for me, leaving my kids at home, and had to have what I did was before, I had this timetable planned. Every drawer had been mapped out, what's in every single drawer, because my sisters and everyone had a separate timings for when to look after them, who's going to pick them up from school, who's going to drop them off to school, making sure they had a good network of people that could support them. And that's one other thing that you need to consider before you consider this fetal surgery is, A, who's going to look after your kids, because especially because when you come back, you're still going to be recuperating, so they're still going to be having to look after your children and help you out. So you need to have the support network in place. And that's one thing they asked me at that time, that if you have got a support network in place, because if you don't, then it's not recommended, because you need the support network. And I was a bit overwhelmed, but yeah, that was the point of like, okay, let's get it over and done with. Okay, so we came out, and I was really, really tired. I remember being in a lot of pain, and I was groggy, and they'd given me morphine, they'd given me other painkillers, because at this time the pain was going to be catastrophic, so they needed to take me off painkillers. And usually you'd come out within 5 days. Not me though. No. I ended up having an infection on my leg of sort, and it was they called it, I felt embarrassed at that time, but it was cellulitis apparently, because I felt as if like I was sitting on a remote or something, and I kept telling my husband that I feel like I'm sitting on a remote. And that's one thing you have to keep mentioning it. Never think to yourself, don't mention it. I mentioned it, that's when they realised, hang on, there's something there, is red. But they used to check me every day anyway, so every day I used to get scanned by this lovely consultant. He used to come in, check, and Dr. Adelina checked up on me every day, and they would do the set of obs, and then they would do the scan, and then they were checking it, and when they did my bloods, my infection levels were getting high. So what they decided to do was put me on a course of antibiotics, and that's why I had to stay longer, because I was the first. They didn't know what was going on, so he was like, I'm not feeling comfortable sending you home. I was quite vulnerable at the time, because by the time, because there was incisions, I couldn't sleep on this side. When I would turn on this side, I couldn't sleep on this side because I was in pain. And now, because of my leg, I couldn't even sleep like this. So it was painful. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For me, it was painful. it wasn't painful once you're used to it and you're just lying normally, but turning around was quite painful for me. And then because I couldn't sleep, I used to just do laps on the hospital, the hospital ward, and then I couldn't do too many laps because then my every time I do too many laps, my stomach would tighten because obviously there's kind of an activity happening. But that's how I spent the 10 days, and I missed my kids, and then I wanted to go home. But we were given painkillers. I was given low blood pressure lowering tablets because they said that obviously now you've poked the uterus, it can contract, so that you should try and stop the contractions. And I stayed in hospital for 10 days, and then I just went to my bed. So all the nurses were so brilliant on the ward. And just before I went, I had another MRI at the Gosh. So I went over to Gosh, got my MRI done, and then we went. And I remember on the car ride home, because we took our car there the last time we went, and we found, you know, when you have Just Park, we found a place by the church, and it's cheaper parking then, and then we just parked there, and we just kept it there for 10 days really. And then yeah, so then it says here, let me see. Yeah, once I came back, I was then going to be examined every 2 weeks at the Birmingham Women's Hospital, and they would do scans. When they did scan, at the front of my stomach here, there was this, like it was coming up as a dark shadow, and actually it was a clot of blood. Now it wasn't a dangerous. They kept monitoring like what's going on, but it wasn't a dangerous clot of blood. The reason I'm telling you is not to scare you. I'm saying to you is that I went through all these anomalies and I'm fine. So they thought it was a clot of blood, and it was, but they just kept an eye on it because you haven't got infection, you're not heating up, your health is otherwise okay. But the only thing it did was it blurred the pictures, so you couldn't see the baby that much to see if it was moving or do the measurements. So they managed to do the ventricle measurements at some sort, but the ventricles weren't dropping. So they're dropping a little bit, but not by the amount that they wanted it to drop, and they kept increasing now. So every time they do a scan every 2 weeks, it increased. And they were like, you know what, she probably is going to need a shunt. And then they did one more MRI scan, so they only did one more MRI scan afterwards. And I remember, this is one thing I'll tell you so important, is at one point when they did the MRI, when the MRI results came in and Dr. Bill Martin had to come in, obviously they have to mention everything to you. That's their job, they should do that. And he had taken a scan of the brain or something because we went to the MRI, and he said they didn't have those lines in the brain, that she has a bit more. So because I was holding on to the cognitive side, because when they did the scans, the Chiari had reversed. So because the Chiari had reversed, I was just like over the moon, because obviously they couldn't promise the movement, they couldn't promise it, but I held on to the point that at least cognitively she'll be there, so she'll be able to give me hugs and she'll be able to enjoy life. Yeah, and I remember thinking, okay, so this is okay. I mean, later on I'm going to talk about the support network I had, and which is why I was thinking like this. And then when he said that, and I remember, it just felt like, and the best way I can explain it is, it felt like, you know, when you're in a swimming pool and you could hear these voices, but they're blurring out. That's exactly. I was just like, okay. Because at that point I didn't know what to do. But later on, when I spoke to Dr. Adelina, she said, look, this is all new to us. We don't do MRIs of fetuses. We don't. But if I'm doing the MRI of the fetuses now, we are going to find things that look a bit abnormal, but there could be nothing. So she gave me a bit of comfort in that sense. So then I was a bit okay, and I was a bit happy. And I kept it in my belly for about 8 weeks, obviously upstairs, lying down, trying to get to appointments, not walking too much. I had a lot of people helping me, so they were picking my kids up and everything. And I was trying my best, obviously, to keep the contractions at bay. But at 32 weeks, my water started breaking. And because my water started breaking, when I went to Birmingham Women, they wanted to keep me in. And they said to me, they're going to keep me in up until I give birth. Because the max you can go to is 36 weeks. So the max anyone with fetal surgery has gone to is 36 to 37 weeks. And so the baby would have been premature, but we don't know by how much. I remember that time it got too much for my kids, because when I had to tell them that mum is still going to be in hospital now, they got a bit emotional and started crying. But I was like, it's going to be fine. But they were checking. They were like, no, your waters haven't broke. They kept checking and all that. I was like, look, I can feel it. But by 3 4 days time, because they kept checking, they were actually, they have broken. And so now we're not going to wait. We're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do it, because we can't wait for you to start contracting, because then there is a potential rupture can happen. So they don't want that to happen. So then I was scheduled in to get the surgery done then. I think Bill Martin's the one who did my surgery, my C-section again. So I had another operation within 8 weeks, and she was at